thank you so much for coming out on a beautiful Tahoe summer evening. Appreciate your time. I am Julie Reagan. I'm Chair of External Affairs for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and I want to welcome you to this fantastic speakers panel discussion. We have two extraordinarily well-credentialed speakers who will give us their great case studies and examples of how other communities across the nation and the world are bikeable and walkable. And then we're going to take a break after they speak and have a team of local experts where we're going to drill down and talk about Lake Tahoe. How do we incorporate these best ideas here in Tahoe and really take our walkability and bikeability to the next level? We've been heading in that direction as a community, which I'm really proud to see happen, but how do we just go that next step? I just want to introduce Norma Santiago, who's our El Dorado County Supervisor and Chair of the TRPA Governing Board, just to say hello.
This is way up there in the Cha-Cha field, just a great job.
Thanks, Norma. Thanks for being here, and thanks to everyone else. And I'll introduce our agency colleagues and our local leaders when we have the panel. But as many of you know, the agency is in the midst of updating its regional plan. And this has been going on for many years. Some of you worked with us years ago to do community visioning. We called it place-based planning. We had a pathway forum where we had 40 stakeholders from around the basin who came together to say, what is the vision for Lake Tahoe? How many people care about protecting the lake? Okay, so we have an agreement to begin the meeting with. This is good. We all agree that taking care of this most beautiful place, Lake Tahoe, is of paramount importance. And the connection to the water is really what happens on the land. What happens on the land at Tahoe, our roadway network, our communities, where we put buildings, all of that affects the quality and the clarity of Lake Tahoe. So tonight, we want to marry up the vision that we have for protecting the lake and also making our communities better places to gather, to walk, to bike. Because we heard that as a top priority from this community when we went through that visioning process. How do we ride our bikes on Highway 50 without getting clipped? You know, that was a huge concern for our community, so we're going to talk about that tonight. So thanks for coming. The program, as I said, will be speakers first. We'll take a break, and then everybody will have an opportunity to ask a question. Jeff, I'm going to ask you to raise these question cards. We have written sheets where you can jot down questions, and we'll collect them on the break, and then we'll go through a series of panelists and ask their questions directly. If you have a specific question for one of the speakers, jot that down, and we'll do that as part of the program. So enjoy the evening. I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Miles Redeman is going to go first, followed by Michael Ronkin. Let me tell you a little bit about Miles. I've known Miles for many years. He's been to Tahoe several times. Happy to have him back. I've known Miles through his public service with the town of Park City, Utah. 20 plus years of public service with the town, and he'll tell you all about some really interesting things that they're doing there. Miles is an internationally recognized and inspiring and thought-provoking public speaker. And what's also interesting to note about Miles' background is that he has a degree in law and planning, urban planning, graduate degrees, and is a Fulbright scholar. He also served as the Director of Information for the 2002 Winter Olympic Games, and he'll be telling you a little about the experience of Park City, having hosted those games and had many of the events in their community. Miles is known for his reputation as being a visual magician and storyteller, and I know he won't let us down tonight. Miles is engaged by communities, corporations, and organizations to address the realities of leading, governing, and changing. And one of Miles', I think, most proud accomplishments and how I've worked with him in the past is through his position as Director of Leadership for Leadership Park City, which is an award-winning community leadership training program. Miles told me he believes that great communities invest in two things, infrastructure and people. And that's part of why we're here tonight, because we all, as community members, need to get more involved and cultivate that engagement of our community, nurturing leadership and fostering these ideas and to have them become reality. So with that, I will turn over the mic to Miles. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
I hope that was for her, because I haven't said anything yet.
We're anticipating.
Yeah, I know. I did work on the Olympics, the 2002 Olympics, for 13 years, but I should start out by telling you I'm no Mitt Romney. So just I wanted to make that clear, although I work with Mitt a lot. And for those of you who have heard me speak before, thank you for your perseverance tonight and for coming again. Because I learned a long time ago that it's always easier to find a new audience than a new slideshow. So for some of you, you might have to hear the same things a couple of times. You know, as I reviewed your regional plan update and so forth, I realized that as many of our communities are, Tahoe is at a crossroads. And of course, you're always at a crossroads, so maybe that's nothing new. But certainly I think you're at a juncture right now where you're starting to move in some dramatically new and interesting ways. And I just wanted to put some perspective on that. So I think Julia already mentioned who I am and some of my credentials and so forth. And I'll tell you what I think I can bring to the discussion. But I should mention as a caveat that I have spoken in Tahoe now over the past 25 years 8 times. And no one has listened to me yet, or at least followed any of my advice. Steve Teixeira has a plan that we did in 1989. And actually, I think some of that has been accomplished. So what will I bring today? Well, I hope I'll bring a little perspective from places other than here, some philosophy, maybe more than a few platitudes. Michael, I'm only the opening act for Michael here, but he told me I have too many platitudes, and some pearls of wisdom. At least I think they're pearls of wisdom. I always try to start at the beginning, so here's the beginning, and then the earth cooled, and then there's Lake Tahoe. So there's 4.5 billion years in just 3 slides. The question always comes up, what does familiarity breed? And what would you say? Contempt. But my own experience is that that's not true at all. Familiarity actually breeds invisibility. And the more we're familiar with anything, whether it's our spouse or our dog or the place that we live, we tend to start to ignore the fine points of that. It becomes backdrop. It becomes the normal, and so we just accept things. Now, I won't do this, but in 1989 when I came, and I do this in a lot of communities I work in, I'll usually come to a community a day or two early, and I'll go around and photograph the community as seen from an outsider. And then I'll play that back to the community, and it's always shocking. It's always shocking. Now, of course, I try to pick out the most shocking pictures, but it is shocking. You go, oh my God, I didn't realize it looks like that to an outsider. But the reality is that it does become invisible to us. And it's very important that we make the invisible visible occasionally. Because many of us, our worldviews, and we talk about worldviews, but our worldview is generally very narrow. And in resort towns especially, because most of us have escaped to resort towns. We've escaped to these places because we don't like the outside world, because we're trying to recreate a Leave It to Beaver America. And we're trying to go back 30 or 40 years. Anyhow, that's more or less the way we see the world in a very constrained way. And I think one of the most important pictures taken in the last century, and that's only 12 years ago, but was the picture taken of the Earth from space. When we finally realized in a visual way that the Earth was not flat, and also that we all are on this one little blue and white planet hung out in space. So you remember that picture when they first started to show it and sort of when the moon landings were and so forth? Not that long ago. And it's important, I assume a lot of you travel. I don't know why you're not recreating tonight, but I know a lot of you travel. Each year I take what I call a city tour. I take 65 people from my community and we go somewhere else. And I brought them to this community here twice to learn from you. Once in 1995 and again in 2006. So this was the group we brought here in 2006. And we're very inspired by what Lake Tahoe is doing to try to save the assets of the lake, the environmental programs that were taking place and so forth. There were other things we saw that we weren't very inspired by. And we went back and said we could do better than that, and we've been trying. I've been doing these groups for 40 years, and they really are successful in bringing people. For instance, you know that if you go to a conference by yourself or with someone else, and you learn something wonderful, and you come back and try to tell your coworkers, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear about your vacation. They don't want to see your pictures. They don't want to hear what you learned. But if you go with 60 or 65 people, you make a real impact on your community. So I just throw that out for you. So the saying is, if you want to see the big picture, what? You have to get outside the frame. And that's really what I'm trying to talk about tonight, because most of us live inside a frame of one kind or another. Or we say, think outside the box. It's a real cliche. I love this cartoon from the New Yorker. Man talking to his cat, never think outside the box, right? So, and sometimes we really shouldn't think outside the box. I guess I believe that maybe we should think local and act local. Sometimes we get so global in our thinking, we forget to take care of our own backyards. And maybe if everyone took care of their own backyards more, the world would be a better place. I don't know, it's just a little philosophy. Anyhow, I'd like to talk about change because it's the one thing that seems to be the constant in everyone's life nowadays. Now, for most of human history, change took place very slowly. I was a history major, and I remember one of my professors showing Egyptian art. And he showed art, from early dynasties, and he showed it all the way through 2,500 years of early Egyptian history. And he said, unless you were an expert, you could not tell the difference. That's how little things change over 2,500 years. And until fairly recently, until our grandparents perhaps, whatever your father did, you did, he did what his father did. Things you just weren't expected to change. That wasn't a big issue in human development. And yet nowadays, here's a man talking to his secretary, the boss, and she says, "Sir, the following paradigm shifts occurred while you were out." And it seems to happen that quickly. You go out to lunch, you come back to the office, your company's been taken over, you've been demoted, the world has fallen apart, the euro has collapsed, who knows what's happened. But change occurs to that pace, and because of our technologies, everyone knows about it. Most of us resist change, and I am a prime example, and my wife explains that to me all the time, because I don't like change very much. And maybe some men like change, but I think women deal with change better. I'm just saying that for your benefit, really. I don't think it's true. Why? Because tradition is threatened. The cost sometimes of the change seems like they're not worth it. Maybe we don't know where it's going. We get fearful. And the status quo, you say, hey, what's wrong with what we're doing now? Why do we have to change? That's where the familiarity comes in. You look at Tahoe, you say, hey, we're doing okay now. Why do we have to change? Why worry about it? But we all do know this. Resisting change doesn't stop it. And change is taking place whether we like it or not. That's sort of the bottom line and all that. And I think you also know that change creates stress. And stress creates unease. As a matter of fact, we use a better word, dis-ease. Dis-ease. And it's been shown that stress creates disease. You see that in all the, the popular blogs and the popular magazines and so forth, that the more stress you're under, the more likely you are to get sick. As a matter of fact, there's a test, we used to use it all the time, of 100 questions about change. They say, and the questions are yes or no, has this change taken place in the last year for you? And the interesting part is that the changes could be either good or bad. Did you get married? Did you get divorced? Did you inherit money? Did you lose money? It's that kind of thing. And the thing is that it's the sum total of the changes that have taken place over the last year, good or bad. And if you reach a certain level, they say that's a really high indicator that you will probably be sick, that your body just won't cope with it. So we know that it does cause stress and it does cause some disease. Many cultures have tried to keep change out. And probably, and I use this as a metaphor, obviously, but it's a physical fact as well. This is the largest masonry structure ever built, 1,300 miles, built by the Chinese over many centuries. And until Tiananmen Square, it worked pretty well. It really did. They're still trying to keep change out in China in certain ways. But as you remember, the Tiananmen Square uprising, they started to use the fax machine. And that certainly jumped the wall. And nowadays with the Arab Spring and the iPhones and the internet and all that, it's pretty hard to keep change out using that. Now they use more sophisticated methods. But each of us in our own minds, I think, has created a wall like this to keep disease out, to keep our status quo, to keep going in the same direction so that we're not crazy all the time. So I think it's pretty important. If you don't believe that, go home tonight and whatever hand you brush your teeth with, change the hand. Just put the toothbrush in the other hand and brush your teeth and see how uneasy that feels to you, how stressful that feels to you. You go, oh, that doesn't feel right, and it doesn't. So that's one thing. The reality is too, also, this is Machu Picchu, for those who don't know, that it seems like at the height of many civilizations, they failed. And we don't know why, whether it's the Anasazi down near where I live in Utah, or it's here at Machu Picchu, the shards of many civilizations that failed seemingly at the height of their achievement. It's not well known, but most people theorize that something changed in their environment, whether it was war, whether it was famine, whether it was the climate. There's a whole lot of reasons that you can posit for it, but something changed and they didn't succeed. And I don't think there's any 11th commandment that will succeed, or that Tahoe will succeed, or that Park City will succeed. So I think it's a cautionary tale that we look at. There's no guarantee in this. It doesn't come with a written guarantee, 90 days, you take your money back here. So we know that doing nothing is doing something. So that anyone who advocates, well, we don't have to do anything, they are saying we're doing something. We're just not doing what you might like, because the future does happen. And what is the future? That's really one of the hardest things to figure out. People always ask, and they certainly hire people like Michael and I to talk about the future. And we look at our screens and so forth, but I like this here. The future is characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and paradoxes. All the kinds of things we hate. I mean, because it doesn't give you an answer. It doesn't tell you which direction you should go in. What does it mean? It means the signs are pointing simultaneously in opposite directions all the time. So it doesn't give us any guidance. That's what we're really looking for when we talk about the future. What should we do? Where should we invest our money? Where shall I move to? Who shall I marry? Who shall I get divorced from? We're looking for some certainty, and there is no certainty out there. Unless, of course, here's the International Association of Clairvoyants began their annual meeting by reading the minutes of next year's meeting. Now, maybe that's good, Maybe you could do that. Maybe you are clairvoyant, and if you are, see me afterward. I'd like to talk to you. So what do we do when we get confused? Well, we hire experts. We hire people who think they could tell us what's going to happen coming along here. So there's a guy crawling through the desert, and thank God a panel of experts. I like to point out our consultants. It's another word for the experts there. But where I come from, people say that a consultant is a man who knows 10,000 ways to make love but doesn't know any women. So, a little slow here tonight. Okay, we're going to work on it. I can wait. Okay. Tom Friedman, I think you've heard of him, columnist for the New York Times, written some wonderful books. But he has pointed out, that regardless of the future, he said even Americans can no longer afford to live like Americans, because our lifestyle is, maybe it's not profligate, but it's certainly at a level that, like here, it would take 11 Earths to support the lifestyle that we have if everyone in the rest of the world, the other 7-8 billion people in the rest of the world, lived like we did. And we don't have 11 Earths. Some people quibble with it, they say 3 Earths, some people say 5 Earths, but it's more than one. The resource base just isn't sufficient to handle the kind of lifestyle we have. We take that pretty seriously in Park City, and I don't know if you take it as seriously here. I know that there's a lot of climate skeptics, and that's fine. But we know that as we look at the climate and so forth, and we look at the snowfall, we're concerned about that. We hired some wonderful scientists from the University of Colorado in Boulder, from the Climate Center there, to do studies for us, and here's what they told us. They said, given what's happening now, the trends, that there'll be no snow at our base elevation at almost 900 feet by 2075. And if we keep going, there'll only be snow at the very top of the mountain by 2100. Well, 2/3 of our economy in Park City is based directly on skiing. We have 3 ski areas there. We have Deer Valley, Park City Mountain Resort, and Canyons. So that we take that pretty seriously. That's not a long lead time to say, what are we going to do about it? So obviously we're trying to do things. Here's the one slide I saw that really refutes anything that climate skeptics say. I don't know if you've seen that, but positive proof of global warming. So many of our plans, those of us who consider ourselves planners, looking at the future, trying to discern what might happen, talk about the need for sustainability. And the best definition of sustainability is the one the United Nations uses, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It sounds good, not hard, pretty hard to implement, we know that. Because there's this continuum there. There's the theoretical, what should we do? And then there's the practical, what will we do? What should we do? What theoretically could we do? And what are we really going to do? And I like to quote the famous philosopher Yogi Berra. He said, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. It's slow here. It's like rolling in the back. Okay. You know how difficult it is to implement the things. When we say, all right, we shouldn't drive as much, we shouldn't fly. we wouldn't have a resort area in Park City if people didn't fly in. 80% of our guests fly in. That's the most energy consumptive, wasteful way of getting anywhere, is to fly in a tin can at 30,000 feet. So, all right, so what we tried to do is say, okay, here's where we are. We understand all that. Who is doing better than we are? And again, I'm talking about Park City. I'm using that as an example. And we looked for other people's experiences. We said, are other people in a similar situation doing better than we are? So we looked at Europe. We looked at some of the great ski resorts, because that's what we consider ourselves, a ski resort in Europe. And we looked at places like Saint Anton and Zermatt, which has a wonderful railway system in. I mean, I drove from the North Shore to the South Shore today, and I said, I'm going to stop at a few places. My wife and I drove down. I said, I'll stop at a few places and take pictures. There were so many people. I couldn't stop at all. I mean, there was not a chance. In fact, if I got off the road, I would have been run over. I've never seen so many people, and I understand why. It's so gorgeous. But here in Zermatt, they come in on the train, no cars. And I like to point out that about, maybe 6, 7 years ago, I was invited to speak in Scotland in the Cairngorms. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Cairngorms, but they're a mountain range in Scotland. It's where some of their resorts are, their ski resorts are. So I was there, and I stayed at a place here called Rothmerchus, and the proprietor of that, or the owner of that, is a man named Johnny Grant. There he is now. They don't have national parks the way we have them in our country. They have huge estates that have been granted over decades and centuries. And this man owned this estate called Rothmerchus. It was about 100,000 acres. And we drove around, and they run it like a national park. It has buildings and all kinds of things, an entry fee, and it's beautiful. It's just gorgeous. And I said to him, has this been in your family forever? I mean, this was like, this looked like one of those English soap operas. It was gorgeous. And he said, no, I'm not from here. I said, really? You're not even from here? And, I said, well, where are you from? He said, well, we're from about 10 miles down the road. So I said, really? When did you move here? He said, 1066. And he was, right, at the Norman Conquest. He was absolutely serious about that. I mean, it wasn't said as a joke, right? And he said, and I said, in our country, if you're in like Tahoe for 3 weeks, you're a local, 1066, 1,000 years, you're still not a local here? He said, no, this is not our way. So, so there's some real differences, I guess, between what Europe has done and are doing and what we're doing. That doesn't mean, I think Michael maybe will touch on that a little bit more because he's more familiar with Europe than I. He lives in Geneva. The truth of the matter is we have a lot to learn from Europe, but we're not Europeans. They have a history of this long inhabitation. That's why I talked about that. The acceptance of limits. It's a much smaller area. They're not always looking to grow and expand the way we have here. A real craftsmanship, culture, tradition, and history, fixed boundaries. It's so small. Most of Europe could fit inside 3 or 4 Western states. When you look at that. I mean, anywhere we go from Park City, it's 5 hours drive. I mean, just natural, And resource scarcity and efficiency. Gas costs how much in Europe now, Michael? $8 a gallon. And people aren't complaining, are they? Well, they might complain, but that's what it is. They drive. Smaller cars. Yeah. Yeah. So there you go. And there's this also here, something that hadn't happened in this country until right now, this lack of economic and social mobility. And Michael, you'll mention that because he told me that there's more social mobility probably in Europe right now than there is in the United States, which is shocking, really shocking. Anyhow, so the problem with the European solutions is that they're so un-American. And that's what they are. I mean, if I was called up before Senate committee, they'd say un-American. So we looked at North American resort experience as well. Again, I take my groups, we travel to all the other resorts seeing what we can learn, what's working here. Well, the first thing I think you all know is that we have gone through a tremendous period of disposable income and of easy credit. We've all benefited from that and we've all been hurt by it. We've benefited by it because there's been tremendous growth and boom in just about all our resort towns. There have been more 5-star hotels built in the last 10 years in all the resorts. I mean, I look at North Star, I look at Squaw, I look at Aspen, I look at Vail, I look at Park City. I mean, it's just ridiculous. There aren't that many rich people out there. But we have a lot of hotels because there's so much easy credit, so much money. The reality, though, is because of that, we have suburbanized the West. We have suburbanized the mountains. And I was involved with a film that for PBS about 12 years ago called Subdivide and Conquer, a modern Western. And I don't know if any of you saw it. They still play it occasionally. So, oh, one person saw it in the back there. I like to point out, and it's true, I still get calls like at 3 in the morning, because they must play it on some of these PBS channels like in Des Moines, Iowa or somewhere, because someone else will call me, oh, I saw you on television, You were a lot younger, weren't you? I said, yeah. Anyhow, we have 1,000 realtors in Park City. We have a population of 7,800. So when people say, what business are you in? We say, well, we're in the ski business. Well, really, we're in the Subdivide and Conquer business. We're in the selling ourselves business. Okay, it's not illegal, it's not immoral, but it's the reality. We've been selling to other people, and it's nice, I guess, in some ways. But it's led to this kind of resort life cycle, where originally, I say in the 60s and 70s, we start to welcome people. We had a lot of early development, and then the resentment set in as people said, oh my God, it's crowded here, the roads are crowded, I don't know anyone at the post office anymore, all those things. And then I think you all know Confrontation Commissioner. When people come to your meetings and what happens, it's like a free-for-all. Civility is left at the door, and people start attacking each other because they're pissed off. And why haven't you done something about it? I don't know. Why haven't you done something about it? All right. And if we're not careful, well, that's what we do. We blame people because we say, who is in charge here? But the reality is we're all in charge here. And if we're not careful, we self-destruct. And I don't mean the mountains are self-destructing, but the sense of community. The thing that originally drew us together, the small sense of networking, can disappear. And you're not alone in that. We've all suffered from it, some earlier than others. Aspen is an old line resort, about 60 years old now. They've done it, so we've always watched them as a bellwether because they've done such a good job at trying to control growth and bring in affordable housing and so forth. I came from Crested Butte. We're still trying to do that there. I still work with them a lot. Telluride. These are small resource towns, mining towns that morphed into resort towns and enclaves of the wealthy and have dealt with this. How do you handle tremendous wealth? How do you reinvent yourself? How do you still keep a sense of community? Well, one of the people who's really done a lot about that over the years is a man named Eldon Beck. He sort of took the European experience and applied it to America and as a landscape architect. And he really was one of the people who designed the original Vail Village. And he took that concept and redesigned and designed Whistler, the original Whistler Village. And the whole idea is, again, if we're going to live in the mountains and we're going to accommodate people, we don't have a way in our country to say you can't come in except financially. We can do that. We can say it's so expensive you can't come in. But otherwise, we can't pass a law and say you can't be there. I can't. I'd like to do that, but I can't do that. So not you personally. I'm just using it as an example.
I don't want to go to
Yeah, I don't blame you. We wouldn't get this kind of crowd on a Thursday night, in the summer. Believe me. Squaw Valley, is sort of copied that. And you could say, someone asked me last night at the meeting, isn't this all just plastic Disneyland? Well, yeah, it is. Yeah, okay. But, we've had a very short inhabitation in these places too. This isn't 500 years old. Most of the European towns we talked about have grown and changed and so forth. If people live here for 500 years, I don't know if those buildings would stand, but things would change. People put their own imprint on them. Well, again, I come from Park City, and I like to point out, because someone asked me about this once when I showed this slide, my God, that's the most beautiful place we've ever seen. And it is beautiful, but I photoshopped that picture, so just to piss you off here. And we have a real connection with California and with this area, because the Donner Party came they didn't go into Park City because they would have stopped at the bars and never left. But they came close to Park City on their journey out, and one of the people who was scouting the Mormon Trail that year told them how to go. You just go right across those salt flats, guy. No problem, man. It's the I-80s. It's really easy. You go right across there, and they got bogged down there. Had they stayed and had dinner in Park City and so forth, this never would have happened. But they didn't, and we know what happened there. The big change that happened for all of us was the advent of the railroad, which was connected not far from Park City, a promontory point. And so that opened the mines. And Park City was the second largest silver strike in the United States, second only to Virginia City. And for 100 years we mined silver. There's 2,000 miles of tunnels under the town of Park City. And it was all industrial mining. None of this pick and shovel stuff you see down in Cedar Creek. This was big money from the East Coast coming in with mining engineers. In the 1880s and 1890s, all the engineers, this was Silicon Valley. All the smart guys were right here building these things and digging through hard rock, and it was incredible. And our population, you know, when you look at 140 years of Park City, we realized we had about 40, 50 years of boom and 100 years of bust. And that really images a lot of the places. But what's happened is that many of our towns, all of our towns, to tell the truth, have really become these kind of enclaves of nostalgia. We all like to sort of say, oh, we like it the way it is because we don't like change. And as I said, many of us, you know, I'm generalizing obviously, but most of us moved here not to deal with change. We moved here for a very specific reason. We love the resource, we love the trails, we love the trees. We don't like when someone takes a tree down. We don't like when someone builds something new. We just don't like it. We like it the way it is when we saw it here. The last settler syndrome, me too. And you know, we yearn for a time, as I said, that never was while avoiding a future that is inevitable. Because that's the reality. The world's moving on whether we like it or not. Outside the confines, it's still moving on. This is a picture, the first picture I took in Park City in 1969. And it was listed as one of the 100 best ghost towns in the West. And this is the picture. So every time I hear, when someone used to come to my office, oh, the good old days, I said, well, yeah, that's the good old days. There was not one business open in town. It was listed as a ghost town, and that's the way it looked. You know, so as we looked at it in Park City, we said, how can we then take that downward spiral, and again, this goes on for a long time, and turn it around into an upward spiral? How can we rebirth, renew, rejuvenate, and go into a renaissance for the future? Is there a future? Are we just guaranteed that we're going to sink, or can we come somewhere else? And the reality came that most of us didn't understand business very well. And so you have to ask yourself, why would anyone want to invest dollars in Park City or your community? That's what you're asking. Why would someone want to move here and invest? Well, for a while, because it was easy money. People were investing everywhere, you know, they just invested and so forth. But now the harder question comes. Now you're competing with other people and there's very little money out there. People are afraid to invest. They're holding on to their money. They're being cautious. So you have to ask yourself, why would people want to invest in Tahoe? Now you could say, we don't care. Don't invest. And I say, fine. We'll take the people who you don't want to invest and we'll invite them to Park City. Because that's a sure sign to me that you're going to die. You could disagree with me. A lot of people do, but that's my own feeling on it. Because capital is mobile. In today's world, trillions of dollars change place electronically every day without any governmental interference. And it goes where it's wanted and it stays where it's well treated. And if you want to succeed in today's world and upgrade your facilities, you're going to have to attract capital here. Or you can say we're going to go back to a way everything will just sort of fall back into the earth and we'll be the way we were, you know, before it was discovered. And again, I can understand that, but I realize most of our people didn't understand business. Here's the executive talking on the phone. He says, $1 billion is 1,000 million? Why wasn't I informed of this? And that's sort of the level of most people's sophistication when it comes to the economy. They just don't get it. They don't get what's going on out there and why people do things. So I found this story of Sam Walton. This is Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. I only have 7 minutes. Okay, the word's up there. So Sam Walton said, you know, before he retired, he said, he was interviewed and they said, how were you so successful? And he said, good decisions. And the interviewer said, well, how'd you make so many good decisions? And he said, experience. And he said, Mr. Walton, where did you get all those experiences from? Bad decisions. And I think, you know, we have a lot to learn from that. Many of us have made lots of bad decisions, and it's time that we make some good ones here. So what has to change in order to build a new economy and successful community for the future? Well, I'd say two things, infrastructure and attitude. Maybe I should put it the other way, attitude and infrastructure. Both of those things have to be upgraded fundamentally in order to succeed. And the question that you all ask, and we ask too, can a community change and prosper without engendering more unbridled growth? Nobody wants to go back to the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s with everyone doing everything and wrecking the environment. So the question is, can you change, can you attract capital and not have it wreck what you've done here and what the environment is? It's a hard question to ask. I know in Park City, we really worked hard to upgrade our recreational experience. I see that happening here. I see it at North Star, I see it at Tahoe, I see it at Alpine Meadows. I hear Homestake is talking about it. Down here at Heavenly, people have invested money now in gondolas and snowmaking and new trails. I don't hear so many people complaining about that. Maybe you are, but a lot of people like the fact that there's investment there. So, we've invested a lot in Park City, lots in that. We've also invested a lot in our local businesses and our business climate to make sure that we have some vibrancy there, that we don't lose it all to some of the other newer resorts, that we don't lose it all down the hill to Reno, that we don't lose it all to San Francisco, that we don't lose it all to someone else. Because we want a vibrant community there. We want families with kids to be able to live there and make a living. And just so you'll know, there's the street now that I showed you that earlier picture of what the street looked like in 1969. There was a lot of investment, a lot of change that went on to reconstruct that street. And we revitalized our lodging product. And guess what that meant? A lot more density. A lot more density. Hard trade-offs that we had to make against a lot of opposition in order to get the kinds of facilities that we thought would bring people who wanted to stay, because most of our guests don't want to stay in $59 motel rooms anymore. They just don't. Again, I point this out. You do whatever you like, but all these hotels have been built in the last 10 years. And learning from here, when I came here in 2006, you taught us this about the triple bottom line, about looking at the economy, the community, and the environment, and trying to find an intersection where you could really find the sweet spot. And it's a hard thing to do, but it's important. And we looked at what our future would be. Where is the sweet spot? What could we do to attract locals and tourists? Because Michael and I both talk about the fact that having the communities suitable and loved by their locals are going to attract the tourists. You don't build a community for the tourists. You build a community for yourselves. And if you do a good job doing that, the tourists will love you. Open space was important to us because we don't have any. We don't have any protected open space in Park City. Everything in Park City is mining claims. The mountains, the valleys, everything. So we've had to go out and buy everything. We've had to pass $70 million worth of bond issues over 25 years in order to buy up parcels of land from farmers, ranchers, and mining claims in order to keep it open and to keep some of the great areas that we have, like nature preserves and wetlands, open and so forth. We've had to invest in things like affordable housing because this isn't suitable for the people who you want living in your community. Well, maybe it is here, I don't know. But we've built a lot of workforce housing. We've invested in our festivals and our special events. And what I mean by investing, we give them money. Investing to us means you actually write a check. We write them a check. Everything we earn in taxes off the Sundance Film Festival, we give back to them. We don't make a penny off of them. Now, businesses make money off of them, but we as a community don't make, as a city, don't make anything. And we invested in hosting the Winter Olympics. As I pointed out, 13 years of my life, we're working with Salt Lake City and Park City doing the Winter Olympics. I got to run the torch in the town. My hair was a little lighter, but it was a great experience. I know that you've talked about hosting the Olympics here. I can't tell you whether you should or not. We're going to bid again for the same Olympics you are, which will be in 2026. And so will Denver, and so will probably Missoula, and maybe a few other places, I don't know. But it won't be easy for you to get it, but if you do get it, it'll be fabulous for you. Because you can look at a lot of things, not only sports, but culture and the environment as well. And we learned a lot about the Olympics and how to handle traffic, how to build outlying parking lots, how to build transit centers and buses. I know I'm speaking very quickly now because they're giving me the signal. Downtown in Salt Lake, yes. How to build, this was the track system, light rail that went into Salt Lake. Everyone said it wouldn't work. It's been expanded twice since then. It's being expanded for the third time now. It's working beautifully. And it was an incredible once in a lifetime, and I'll be happy to answer questions on that later on. But really, what we learned most is this. This is a saying by Patty Limerick, a professor at the University of Colorado. She said, our generation might best be remembered by what we choose not to do. We have the power to do it all. What shouldn't we do? And how smart are we not to do things? Well, one thing is we know that we've suburbanized the mountains, and there's only two things that I know that Americans don't like. They don't like sprawl, and they hate density. So it makes it really hard to plan in the interstices. What do you do then to handle the people if you don't like? Well, everyone talks about smart growth and it sounds great, and we're all trying to figure out what that means, put a flesh on that, but that's what we're trying. Certainly the key to it, Michael will talk a lot more about that, is transportation and roads, about being able to bring people around your community because cars burn a lot of carbon. We know that. I'm rushing fast. We now carry, this was in 2006, when we carried a 1 millionth passenger. We subsidize the bus system. It's free to the user. Our taxes subsidize the bus system. There's no fare. Just this past, last night I learned that we just passed our 3 millionth rider. Every year now we carry 3 million riders on that bus system. And we just instituted a Park City to Salt Lake City leg of that bus system. And guess what? It costs us a lot of money to subsidize it. And everyone always says, does it make money? No, it loses money hand over fist. But it also makes our community that much better. So we decided to invest in it. We talk about idle free. I won't even go through this because I'm running out of time here. But idling uses up a lot of gas, I can tell you that. But at the same time, we've built garages too, because people still drive cars. And our merchants say, hey, if we don't have garages where people can park, they're not going to stay here. Someone suggested this is a garage. We didn't think that would be that good. And biking, that's some of this is about biking. We just became the world's first IMBA, which is the International Mountain Biking Association, gold level mountain biking destination. And we're trumpeting that everywhere. Every ad we do talks about that. Mountain biking. We now have, when we started this, we had 1 mile of trail in the city. 25 years ago, now we have 400 miles. So we've invested big time in doing that. There's another article that just came out on June 29th. Park City earns mountain biking honors. It's everywhere. And that becomes a big draw for us, okay? And you have lots of people out there racing, being crazy and having a good time. And we didn't figure that out by ourselves. We learned that from Sun Valley. They did it before we did. On one of the trips, I took everyone there and they said, look at these trails. Why don't we have trails? I said, well, why don't we build them? And we had 65 people, came back and started to work on it. So we first built a rail trail. We took an old railroad line, we built it. I won't even go through that. It's my wife. We see that the Tetons have just built this great new trail up to the Tetons, and then up to Yellowstone they're building it. And you have one of the great trails here. I was just on it the other day in Tahoe City. What an incredible trail you folks have built there. I don't know why you're not all the way around the lake by this time. This is the way it used to look. It's expensive and it's hard, so you do it. You get together as a community here. And then we looked at places like Paris. And we looked at places like Portland, where Michael's worked, and we said, hey, look, they're doing bike sharing and all those kinds of things. So maybe we should really look at biking not just as a recreational pursuit, but maybe as a transportation pursuit. And we started to do a plan, and we did this great plan. And we outlined all the costs of doing things, and we just passed a $14 million bond issue to build all the tunnels under the big roads and so forth so that people could go on their bikes and not get hit by cars. We know that people like heavy metal, but they usually don't like SUVs. So we built these tunnels and stuff. And then there's Lake Tahoe. Okay, there you are, a world treasure, Mark Twain said the fairest picture the whole earth affords, and it's both a blessing and a burden for you folks, because you're taking care of one of the world's great treasures, and I'm glad I'm not, because it's tough. I can see how tough it is. You're in a growth-constrained system here. And the question again, can you grow smarter and not grow bigger? I don't know, I won't even go into that, but we know that was like Issyk in Kyrgyzstan, where I did some work, and they know Lake Tahoe, and they know what you're doing here. They asked me about it. But you know all the issues that you have up here. I don't have to go through the fire. You got it all here. And you have a compact here, which is really the wonder of the world in a lot of ways, and also the cautionary tale. A lot of bureaucracy involved in that, and a lot of economic stagnation. You're now trying to find your way. How do we take the good parts and modify that so that we can really work through these issues and get those three things, the community, the economy, and the environment, to work in harmony here. And you have plans, and a lot of visions here. And there are better visions than this, discovering that the light at the end of the tunnel is New Jersey. That's probably not the best vision, okay. So you have this update plan that you're working on here. And here's the realization. I read your plans and I read all the studies, and I realized that some problems are so complex that you have to be highly intelligent and well-informed just to be undecided about them. And that's where I am. I read it all and I said, oh my God, there's so many moving parts here. How do you do this stuff? I wish you well. We're all going to be watching what you do here. So how can you balance all that stuff? And I'd say this, maximum flexibility. You have to not be afraid of trade-offs. And you know what a trade-off is? You're not happy and they're not happy. That's the trade-off. But you have to understand the local interests. Not everything's the same. Not one size fits all. So, there's Steve, a much younger Steve. So, your visions have to be possible, plausible, and preferable, because the greatest vision without action is simply hallucination, right? Simply hallucination. Stop writing that down. That's Benjamin Franklin said that originally, then Larry Ellison appropriated it. I got it from him. And the truth of the matter for me, although Michael disagrees with me, but everyone's got these bold visions now and dramatic actions, and they're all sexy and so forth, but it's those small, incremental, persistent steps that are often boring that really bear fruit. I showed you all that open space we've saved, 25 years of constant negotiation. The trail that you're built up on the North Shore, how long does that take? How many meetings have you all attended? You know how hard it is, how boring it is, and yet that's what it takes to make it great here. And there's a lot of pitfalls here, you know that. Proposition 13, the demise of your tools like RDAs, the economic siphoning that's taking place from other resorts and so forth, you know all those things. And the question you all have is, will this work? Can we sort of change course a little bit and make it all work for us? Well, I think you can. That's the hopeful sign at the end. You have great leadership here. You're all great leaders here, right? And you're all sort of moving in the same direction now. You're all saying, yeah, that's because the word community comes from two words, common, unity. It's a contraction of common, unity, community. And that's where communities self-destruct. They start fighting with each other. They're not civil anymore, and they self-destruct. So what are successful communities? People that look at the past, the future, but mostly they're willing to tax and invest in their own future. Because why should anyone else invest in you if you're not willing to invest in yourselves? That's what it really comes down to. And it takes a lot of courage to do that, especially in today's economy, irrational courage. And there's always going to be public clamor and skepticism. I'm almost finished. Because the moon would never rise, the Hopi say, if it paid attention to all the dogs barking at it. And I think you all recognize how many dogs are out there barking. And Harry Truman, as he left office, had this great comment. How come everyone who knows how to run the world is either cutting hair or driving a taxi? Right? So I think you understand that. So what I leave you with is this. Hope, that's not enough. And do something about it. Act on your hope. That's the important part, because the best way to predict the future is to create the future. And Alan Kay, a great scientist, said that. You're all in this together, and I think TRPA is taking the lead on this in a very intelligent way. So I thank you for your time.
Our next speaker has a very interesting background. We're going to run through his presentation. We're going to take a break. Please continue to write down your questions, and then we'll get into our panel of local experts to get into more of a Q&A to think about some of these provocative ideas that we've heard already and that we'll continue to hear from Michael Ronkin. A little bit about Michael. Michael is a national bicycle and pedestrian expert. He actually grew up in Europe, and bicycling and walking were his main modes of transportation, along with trams and trains. And he tells me that really ignited his passion to study the field of transportation, his career. Michael had moved to the States and lived here for 40 plus years as an alum at UC Davis, actually, right down the road. Interestingly, he also worked for the National Soil Conservation Service and the Forest Service, and was employed beginning with in 1984 with the Oregon Department of Transportation. He also worked for 5 years in construction, seeing the construction side of the transportation infrastructure business, which of course is so important to getting projects on the ground. Michael believes that the greatest challenge facing America is redoing the suburbs, most of where new development has occurred over the last 50 years. Most of this development was created as the auto-centric culture that we know, where the automobile is the main mode of transportation, and we have to go back and retrofit this area. for walking and biking. And does that sound at all familiar about Lake Tahoe, with a highway dividing our town? Highways define our communities at Lake Tahoe. But the thing I love about Michael's biography is that he says this is a daunting but not impossible task, and he's going to tell you a little bit about that. Couple notable accomplishments. Michael developed the Main Street Handbook to help departments of transportations with Main Street programs, and he was the author of the Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan, which is a national model for those types of plans, and our transportation folks actually have studied that as we have developed our own Lake Tahoe bike and pedestrian plan. Michael is also a big believer in complete streets transportation policy. He'll talk a little bit about that, about some road diets. So with that, I will turn over the microphone to Michael Bronken.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Microphone to turn over.
Well, right here, on your lapel.
Metaphoric microphone. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here in Lake Tahoe. I have been here before quite a few times. When I was going to UC Davis, I used to love coming up and hiking in Desolation Valley, Desolation Wilderness, and that's what I hope to do tomorrow. But the point of the presentation that I'm going to give you tonight, to pick up on what Miles told you, is we firmly believe that even though you're in a place of great natural beauty, you do live in a human habitat, and that human habitat, whether you want to call it a city or a village or a town, is something you also need to take care of for yourselves. The best way to protect the natural environment is to build great places. A great quip from Andres Duany, one of the founders of New Urbanism. He says the most environmental friendly place in the United States is Times Square, because the millions of visitors going through there every day are not in Yellowstone bothering the bears. So you need to think in terms of what can we do to build great places for ourselves so we live in a good habitat, so we don't have to keep on sprawling into the more natural habitat. And so what I want to talk about is some of the elements that build great cities. So it's kind of interesting that Miles used European examples. I lived most of my life in America, but I do consider myself European as far as background goes. And I have noticed when I give presentations in the United States, there's a lot of resistance to European examples, as you pointed out. But there are some really good things to learn from Europe. So I thought I'd start off showing a couple of slides of lakeside towns in Switzerland that are internationally famous, right? Who has not heard of beautiful Lugano? Who's not heard of beautiful Lucerne? They have this in common with Lake Tahoe. They're on beautiful lakes and they're not that big. What's different from these cities and Lake Tahoe is they're fascinating places even if they're not on a lake. When you go to a place like Lugano and Lucerne, you walk along the lake for a few hours, but you actually spend more time in town because they're actually real places. So the question you need to ask yourself is, if this was not such a beautiful environment, is this a place you'd want to be? Is this a place you'd want to raise your kids? And is this a place people would come and visit? And right now, I'd say the answer probably not, right? So think in terms of what you can do to create a great place for yourselves, as Miles pointed out, and then worry about the tourists, because you live here day in and day out all the time, right? So I'm going to talk about some of the elements of planning that have a huge impact on walkable and bikeable communities. That's what we're here to talk about tonight. How can you reduce the impact of the motor vehicle? What can you do to make your city more bicycle and pedestrian friendly? Today we did a whole day training class with a group of very interested people. We had quite a few professionals. We had a lot of concerned citizens. I've never had so many non-professionals show up for a design class, and we talked a lot about the design details of bikeways and walkways and street crossings and intersections. I'm going to give you some of the big picture planning factors that you as citizens can do more about with your planning commission than the elements of street design at the detail level. I'm going to talk about land use, connectivity, access management, site design and parking, level of service, and creating destinations worth walking to. I'll go through them one at a time. Land use is absolutely critical. When people talk about not liking sprawl or not liking density, what we tend to forget is the very reason why we live in cities, villages, and towns is actually to reduce our transportation needs. Urban transportation is an oxymoron. We shouldn't even be thinking in terms of mobility when it comes to being inside the urbanized area. The reason we have cities is to minimize travel and maximize exchange. That's the very reason why we live in cities, towns, and villages. What we've done in the last 80 years or so is done just the opposite. We've blown our cities out of proportion. We've made it so it's very easy to drive long distances at fairly high speeds in cars. And what have we gained as far as time goes? Absolutely nothing. We've actually lost time. We spend more time in transportation than our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. Am I right? So we have roads that are capable of taking you very fast. We have cars that are capable of taking you very fast. And we have had absolutely no gain in time. We've actually lost time available that we have in our daily lives. So obviously, spreading out, driving longer distances at higher speeds is not the answer. And the reason that has happened is we have actually completely changed the way we plan cities because of the automobile. It's said that planners don't plan cities anymore, traffic engineers plan cities. It's all about how can we get the automobile to move rapidly through town, which is the opposite of what you should be seeking. Real quickly, I'll go through some of the land use strategies that have created the kind of cities that make it so difficult to walk and bike. And I know it's a little bit blurry, but this is the town of Redmond, Oregon. You can kind of make out, does this have a laser? Does this have a laser? It does, but it doesn't seem to be working. Okay, I'll just kind of point in the general direction and just look at my finger, okay? No, don't look at my finger. Look at where my finger is pointing, right? So you can kind of make out the old grid here. This is Redmond, Oregon, a town very, very similar to Lake Tahoe, Stateline here. A town that was about 13,000 up to World War II. You can see how much it's grown now. It's only about 17 or 18,000. Population growth is not what's driving sprawl. There are lots of cities around the country that have lost population, that are 4 or 5 times bigger, even though they've lost population. It's because we sprawled. And it's because we have segregated all our land uses. You can see all the residential, the light blue, on one side. You can see the highway now, which is just the ugly 5-lane commercial strip that you're familiar with. All the industries, still an industrial-based economy, is on the other side. Of course, we put the open space and parks and recreational in the industrial areas, right? So you can see on nearly every trip involves getting in your car, going up and down the highway or crossing the highway. Very hostile conditions for walking and bicycling. So what can we do to change that? Encourage more mixed use, encourage some commercial and other types of activities in the residential and industrial areas so you don't have to go out to the highway every time to meet all of your retail, shopping, and office needs. Encouraging more small-sized pocket parks for neighborhoods, not just big regional parks. Heck, you got the biggest park in the world surrounding you right here, but looking at little pocket neighborhood parks where parents can go with their kids with a playground, right? And then instead of putting the schools way, way out in the exurbs, we're not talking about putting schools in suburbs anymore. We're talking about putting schools in exurbs, so far from town that absolutely no one can think of walking and bicycling to them anymore. So you shrink the footprint of the school, you bring it closer into town, you co-locate it next to a park, because the two big gobblers of land at school are not the school buildings. You look at the typical footprint of a school, the building's just a little dot in the corner, right? The two biggest gobblers of land of schools are the athletic fields and the parking. So if you can reduce the need for athletic fields by co-locating it next to a park, and you have it closer into town where more staff and students, if it's a high school, can walk or bike, then you don't have to have as much parking. The land may be more expensive there, but it's a much better investment. As Miles said, invest in your community. Don't go the cheap route. Don't go cheaper is better. Spend the money, invest it wisely. And this is where you end up with little pockets of commercial areas in the neighborhood, so not all of the commercial activity is on that 5-lane strip. So you will get more walking and bicycling. The other element is street connectivity. It's all very well and good to bring land uses closer together, but you need a way to get there. And the way that you get there is to ensure that you have connectivity. This slide illustrates it pretty well. You can see that on the left and on the right, the land uses are the same. They're the same distance from each other, the school and the house and the market. But you can see on the left, you've got really good connectivity. There's many ways of getting there. You can drive, you can walk, you can bike, and it's about a half-mile walk or bicycle ride to get to the school. Whereas now you can see that if you're going to go to school, you're going to be driven by your parents because it's about a 2-mile drive. You get driven home again by your parents. You have to get out on the busy arterial street because there is no connectivity. There is no way to get around your neighborhood using local streets. So the streets that do take you longer distances are absolutely chock full of traffic. It's very difficult to make left turns onto a busy street. So you ask the traffic engineer to put in traffic signals. The traffic signals reduce the capacity of the roadway, so you've got to widen it again. Think about this. Every time you put in a traffic signal, you have to widen the road to stack all the stopped traffic. Okay? You're basically creating parking lots half the time, and every time you put in a signal on a roadway. So one thing that you're being very smart about here is looking at the roundabouts, for example. So this is why lack of connectivity leads to the kind of sprawl conditions that we have now, and why so many trips have to be made by car, because you haven't given people any other option than to get out there on that busy street. Now, one thing that you're doing here, which I think is very smart, and we did look at the map this afternoon in the class of what you're doing is connecting some of these disconnected streets with paths and trails, and that is really, really smart. If you can't punch your road through, what can you do to connect up these areas with trails? And that is very, very smart. Just another illustration of how connectivity or lack of connectivity impacts streets and why it makes it so hostile for walking and bicycling. If you have high connectivity, you can keep your roads narrow, and narrow roads are much more conducive to bicycling and walking than wide roads. As you have less and less connectivity, your through roads need to be wider and wider till you get to the 5 or even 7 lane cross section. No one wants to walk or bike on that street. It's impossible to cross the street. And this is how you end up with a sea of asphalt that you want to try to avoid. And the Sunbelt cities have been developed in this pattern. Total reliance on arterials to get around the community, no connectivity of local streets, and these are very, very hostile streets for walking and bicycling. They're actually deadly streets. And you end up with intersections like this too. You haven't been given the opportunity to get on and off that street. So when you finally come to an intersection, everyone's trying to get off of it to get all these turn movements. And imagine yourself walking or bicycling through this intersection, right? It's really very daunting task. And when people are asked why don't they walk or bike more, lack of sidewalks, lack of backways is often mentioned, but also these kind of intersections are often mentioned. There's no way, no how I'm going to get through that intersection. It's interesting they'll hop in their car and get through this intersection and risk a fatal crash, but they don't want to do it on bike or on foot, which I totally understand. So we do like to look at good models, and Julie mentioned that I'm a UC Davis alum. I actually chose Davis. One of the reasons I chose Davis over Cornell, those are my two choices, was because I knew it was such a bikeable community. Plus, I wanted to check out California, too. And so back in the 60s already, had a reputation for being very bikeable and very walkable. And they did a lot of very smart things. I'm really sorry it's a little bit washed out here, but you can see how even the more suburban parts of town that were built in the 50s and 60s and early 70s, you do see the cul-de-sac patterns, but they did link them up with linear parks and trails. And that is one of the main reasons why people walk and bike so much in Davis. It's not just the trails themselves, it's the fact that there is that connectivity. One of the things that we've discovered is that it is the #1 factor that we see that correlates with high rates of walking and bicycling is how connected the community is, more than the presence of bike lanes or the presence of sidewalks. There is a higher correlate in connectivity than the actual presence of bikeways and walkways. So connectivity is absolutely key. And here's just a few slides that are just way too washed out to point out you kind of have a mixed bag of connectivity here, and I do understand a lot of it has to do with topography, but topography in and of itself is not an excuse. For example, I've done some work in Juneau, Alaska. Juneau, Alaska is a heck of a lot steeper than any place around here, I can tell you that. And has anyone been to Juneau? Have you seen how they connect their streets, how they connect their streets? With stairways. They actually have public stairways, right? They don't have elevators. Quite a few cities have provided public elevators, right? You got the gondola. So being steep is not an excuse for lack of connectivity anymore. There are ways around that. Like I said, it is the highest correlate with walking and bicycling and safe conditions for all users. The other thing that we need to look at is when you do have a commercial strip running through the center of town like you have here on the highway, is trying to limit all these accesses, all these driveways to the commercial properties, because every single one of them is a potential conflict. And again, when you ask people why don't they walk on their bike, they say, there's no way, no how I'm going to walk on that highway. And the reason is not so much of the traffic going down the highway, it's all the traffic pulling in and out of those driveways. We just observed that today, right? Remember? Yeah, we were coming here, Jeff was driving me, and in front of us was a bicyclist riding absolutely correctly on, he was actually in a bike lane, I think, and I just couldn't believe it. The driver pulled out right in front of him. The bicycle had to slam on his brakes. We saw him, he actually gave a 5-fingered wave, not this 1-fingered wave. He was very polite about that, but he was pretty upset. I'd say 3 or 4 feet was all there was between the bumper of the car and the front wheel of his bicycle. Yeah, so that was a very good illustration of it that we saw just today. So looking at limiting all these types of accesses and trying to constrain it a little bit so that the highway does become a place where you can walk and bicycle comfortably is a very good strategy. And this is something that the DOT Caltrans will be very supportive of too, trying to reduce the number of accesses or put in a median strip. And I know there's a lot of talk about median strips and snow storage. We heard it over and over again, but trust me, a lot of places that get a lot of snow put in planted medians and they deal with it. It can be done. I did work pretty hard to try to get driveways closed as part of my job, the Oregon DOT. I was successful once when gas was, about $1 a gallon. It is politically incredibly hard to do. There's no doubt about that. But again, as you said, the hard battles are worth fighting. If it was easy, we wouldn't be here. You'd be doing it, right? You wouldn't need to bring us in to help you with it. Site design. It's interesting that just the other day I saw one more time that T-shirt that says it's not about the destinations, it's about the journey. No, I'm sorry, it is about the destinations, right? The famous, well, you need roads to get you from A to B. How about making A and B interesting places too, right? So I think the way that we design our destinations is a critical element of creating walkable and bikeable communities. And right now, as Julie pointed out in the introduction, everything that we've done the last 60, 70 years, or 80 years, it goes back, has been around the automobile. How do you access your destination by automobile? Where do you park your car? And that makes for very hostile conditions for people who choose to go there walking, bicycling, or using transit. So there's all kinds of site design tricks that we're looking at, basically reversing what we've done in the past for the automobiles. Instead of having your convenience store in the lower right-hand corner surrounded by a sea of parking, so to get to the front of the store, if you're on foot or bicycling, you go through that parking lot. How about you bring the convenience store up to the front and have the cars park in back, for example? This is not a guarantee of success. This is the business model that banks have been financing for the last 60 years. This is what planning commissions approve. This is what most codes say you have to have if you want to do a restaurant in your community, and it's pretty obvious not going to guarantee that it's going to be a success. You're going to have a sea of asphalt. I got an interesting story to talk about Sam Walton and the Walmart model, I can tell you that too, and it's all about parking. And so, this is a pretty unpedestrian, unbicycle-friendly environment. That's supposed to something like this. Can anyone guess what this cafe was originally? Looking at the architecture. It was a bank. Yeah, so they repurposed a bank. But again, it's not nostalgia, like Miles so correctly pointed out. It's more going back and looking at what did we do well in the past. And this are the kind of lessons that we can learn. And what we did very well is we put buildings at the back of walk so people could just walk right to the destinations. The destination is the purpose of your journey. You talk about going to Scotland, Miles. The Scottish obviously invented fine dining, right? They got this chain that is expanded to America now. It's called McDonald's. And I've heard they have a few in the area. I'm not from here, so I don't really know where you like to eat, but I've heard of this chain. But anyhow, you can see what happens here. If you do want to access this fine dining establishment on foot, you got to make your way through the drive-through. Right? But you can change that. This is a city that had the courage to say, no, if you want to set up in our town, you do things differently. You put your restaurant, it is a restaurant, at the corner. If it's on a corner lot, then you have absolute direct access, so the pedestrian doesn't have to deal with the drive-through and the parking. It doesn't mean you don't have parking, you don't have a drive-through, you just separate it from the entrance for the pedestrians. So these are just some small tricks as far as site design that really have a profound impact on how your community looks. Even the most auto-oriented destination you can think of, a gas station, can be made pedestrian-friendly. And you ask yourself, why would you want a pedestrian-friendly gas station? That makes no sense. It makes a lot of sense. How do gas stations make most of their money nowadays? It's with a convenience store. There are actually areas in the country, and I've seen that in rural America, where people do their actual grocery shopping at those inflated prices in grocery stores and in convenience stores that associated with gas stations because there's nothing else in the community. So here's an example here of the convenience store way up front at the corner with a door that you can see, and the cars enter in the back if they want to gas up. Like I said, I usually don't like to show too many European examples, but I thought this one right here from my hometown, Geneva, Switzerland, gas station right on the sidewalk. It's a residential area, right? You can see the apartment buildings, right? 6, 7 stories, very classic European model, on-street parking, lined with retail, and one of the stores just happens to be a gas station. You just remove 2 parking spots. If you're gassing up, that's where you pull in to get your gas. There's your convenience store. I waited a while to get a photo of a car stopping and the person pumping gas. Waited a long time, then finally a guy showed up with a bicycle and put air in his tires. So I figured, well, that's a pretty good photo op. I'll show that photo instead, right? So as bicyclists, we need gas stations, right? Because that hand pump just takes too much effort. Even big boxes like this, and when I gave this presentation Wednesday morning to your board here, I forgot a lot of questions about this, and It's interesting that you don't have any big boxes here, but trust me, the big boxes want to come, and it doesn't mean you have to do it the way they've always done it in the past. There's a lot of articles coming out, a lot of examples of Walmarts and Targets and Office Depot and Staples and these other big chains coming up with much, much smaller footprints. I mean, instead of the 200,000 square foot Walmart, they're looking at 20, 30, 40,000 square foot stores. Safeway is reducing its footprint. So don't think that to get the kind, like Trader Joe's and others, that to get the kind of business that you think you need to support your community means it has to be this kind of footprint. You can do it differently. You can impose on the corporate offices the way you want them to do business. There's all kinds of examples of communities that have succeeded, not in keeping the Walmarts or the Targets out, but making them do business your way instead of just accepting their way of doing business with a sea of parking and a building a mile away. So let's talk about parking. There's never enough of it, right? Well, on average, and this is an average, about 30% of an urban area is covered with parking. I did a workshop in Los Alamos, New Mexico. This is an aerial photo of their downtown. And everyone guess, it's a dying downtown, not doing well at all. Can anyone guess what their solution was to revitalize their downtown? More parking. Because obviously the problem was not enough parking. That was literally what they're looking at. What can we do to increase parking? Well, let's talk about parking. Sure, sometimes it's full. Most of the time it's empty. I would say it's the most inefficient use of urban space imaginable. If you're looking at reducing the impact of impervious surfaces, your number one line of attack should be surface parking lots, an incredibly inefficient use of space. Big box parking lots like this one right here are sometimes the size of downtown. This is downtown Juneau, a really, really cute downtown. We Google mapped it. The entire downtown could fit in this parking lot here. Okay. And since I took this photo, a friend of mine who's the Alaska Bike Ped coordinator told me, oh, by the way, that Kmart went out of business. So, talking about, it went out of business, right? So, the secret to parking, you do need parking. There's no doubt about that. And this is something that a lot of environmentalists and urbanists don't understand. You really do want to favor on-street parking. There's many reasons why on-street parking is so much better than surface parking lots. I'll just run through a few of them right here. It does buffer the pedestrian. As we were coming over here, Jeff, we looked at a few areas where we're kind of talking about what could we do to bring more sidewalk cafes, and it said people aren't going to want to sit in a sidewalk cafe right next to moving traffic. So to have that kind of retail, that life on the street, you do need to buffer the pedestrian, and the best way to buffer the pedestrian is with parking. So it is a form of traffic calming. There are businesses that really do depend on it, and it is hard to get businesses to orient to the street if they don't see those few parking spots on the street. What's really interesting for your community right here, because you are so concerned about impervious surfaces, is surface parking lots take about 2 times more surface area per parked car than on-street parking. You need about 200 square feet to park a car. That's the actual amount of space that's required for a parking spot. You need to double or even triple that for surface parking lots because you've got the driveways and the aisles that you need for maneuvering. When it's on the street, the parking spot is it. The maneuvering happens in the travel lane, so it really reduces the total amount of land that you're dedicating to parking. So we always favor on-street versus surface parking lots. So like a German architect who first toured America said, having a surface parking lot in your cities is like having a toilet in your living room. You just wouldn't do that, okay? Think of a car as waste material. The car brings you to the city, but once you're there with your car, it's something you want to get rid of. What do I do to get rid of my car, all right? You don't want to leave it in the city. So there's a lot of push for parking structures. Yeah, they're more efficient. You can definitely store more cars per unit of area if you stack them. They're usually incredibly ugly. So one thing that we highly recommend is, the slide disappeared. Yeah, there it is try to make it look like a building, and absolutely key, have retail at the ground floor. You should be able to walk past a parking structure from the sidewalk and not even know it's a parking structure. In fact, if I didn't tell you it was a parking structure, would you have guessed? Right, so this is the secret. You want to hide your parking garages, make them look like buildings. There's even examples now where the second and third floor are offices. For example, so you got ground floor retail, 2 stories of offices, and then 3 or 4 stories of parking above for a 6 to 7 story building. You really, like Miles said, should not be afraid of height. I'm not talking about 20, 30-story towers. Though Vancouver, British Columbia, another waterfront city, has done that very successfully with their 50, 55-story, very, very skinny towers. Really very successful. But we're talking about parking here. Can chains survive without parking lots? Like I said, obviously it's not a guarantor of success. So I like to tell a tale of two pancakes here, right? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. This is taken not too far from here in Reno on a Sunday morning, and I went by a typical IHOP right along the highway here, and there were about 10 cars parked in front. I wouldn't consider that a smashing success for IHOP on a Sunday morning, right? 10 cars parked in front. Downtown Reno has got a restaurant called Peg's, if I remember correctly. Yes, 2 parking spots in front, people lined up trying to get in. So why is this more popular than IHOP? Could it be that the food is better, the ambiance is better, the service is better, right? So you need to think in terms of what can we do to create really attractive destinations and let people fight over parking rather than, oh, let's provide an awful lot of parking so people will come and not worry about what it is that they're coming to. That's totally backwards. So again, I'll emphasize on this, why surface parking is such a detriment to walkable and bikeable communities. First of all, the destinations themselves, like I said, become hostile because they're surrounded by the sea of asphalt. But then the very fact that you have so much parking makes the destinations further and further apart, making it less likely that you're going to walk or bike there because of the greater distances. It becomes a downwards vicious spiral. It just creates worse and worse conditions for walking and bicycling. Therefore, everyone drives. Therefore, no one walks. Right? So you got to reverse that. And the best way to reverse that is to think in terms of limiting the parking supply. The most successful places have very limited and very expensive parking. There's an inverse correlation between the amount of parking and how cheap it is and how successful a city is economically. So don't be afraid to constrain parking. Then finally, rethinking the role of streets. Streets for decades have been thought of something that we need for mobility, to move traffic. Now we're looking more at complete streets, a complete street. I actually one of the founding members of the Complete Street Coalition. I'm one of the lead instructors. And I do have one quibble with the Complete Streets movement, and that is I think we do need to go beyond the right-of-way and include the land uses on either side. To me, a complete street not only accommodates drivers and people walking and people bicycling and transit, but it also has a lively atmosphere on each side. The edges create places that you want to be. You want to be able to walk and stroll down that street. When you're walking down a great street in the city, you're not looking at the traffic. You're not looking at the sidewalk beneath your feet. You're looking at the buildings. You're looking at the edges. You're looking at the trees. You're looking at the parks. You're looking at the things that make that place interesting. Why do people avoid this street here? It works perfectly well for cars, great level of service. This is what's called level of service A, right? It's a very inhospitable place for people not in cars because it is so wide, high speeds, the destinations are far apart, and it is deadly. This is Maryland Avenue in Las Vegas. 4 to 5 pedestrians a year get killed on this section of roadway. Why are people attracted to this street? This is Vancouver, British Columbia, one of the best cities in North America, because it is narrow, it is low speed, it's busy, the destinations are accessible, they're right there. This is a great place to be. What's completely lacking on this street? Can you see what's completely lacking here? Zero traffic engineering. No striping, no signing, no nothing telling you what to do. It's called a naked street. You basically strip it of all traffic engineering. You get people to drive very, very slowly, and people figure it out. It's a shared space is what it is. Very highly successful street. So to talk about the impact of level of service, when you try to achieve a high level of service, which means basically enabling cars to flow through your community at high speeds, this is what you end up with, an amazing waste of space. Try to achieve level of service C or even D or higher, you're just throwing money away. And like Miles pointed out, you should be investing in the good things in your community, not more asphalt. Basically, a high level of service means you don't want people stopping in your community, you just want them barreling through. It's for people who don't like you, basically, getting out of town as quickly as possible. That was the whole purpose of traffic engineering for the last 50 or 60 years, is getting people the hell out of town. That was basically it. That was the traffic engineer's mission. Now we're looking at, hey, what can we do to create a great community? There's a definition of level of service in the old highway capacity manual that told you this is level of service A for pedestrians too. Look at that, you're walking down that sidewalk, there's no one you can bump into. Isn't this a great place to be walking? That same manual told you this is failure, this is level of service F, this is awful. No, we don't want that in our community. We don't want people on our streets. No, we want deserts on our streets. There's something very backwards about the level of service. So when you're looking at your plan, and we've had a very robust discussion about this yesterday morning, don't get fooled by that A, B, C, D, E, F. I think to me that's very, very, very deceptive. When you came home to your parents, you wanted to show them a report card, lots of A's, a lot of F's, right? It's a very, very perverse way of looking at it. What you want to be doing is accepting a certain level of congestion, because that means people want to be there, people are going slowly, there's interesting places to be, interesting things to do, and then you can invest in your money in things that really make a difference in your community, rather than just road widening so people can go through faster. So when you think about it, when you are traveling, everyone seeks a similar experience. You want your trip to be convenient, you want it to be safe, you want it to be comfortable, you want good access. Remember, it's not about mobility, it's about access. I think mobility is something you need to get rid of in all your plans. You want really to create good access. You want reasonable travel time. Most people will tolerate a 20 to 23-minute trip at the most for just daily errands, commute to work, going to offices and things like that. So it's about reasonable travel time. Low cost, not necessarily the cheapest. Reliability, absolutely essential for transit, right? If that bus says it's going to be there at 8:08, it better be there at 8:08, not 8:07, not 8:18, right? But really, speed is irrelevant. It's not about the speed, right? If you think about a restaurant experience, for example, think of the several things that you seek in a restaurant experience. You want good food, right? You want good ambiance, right? You want good service. You want clean silverware and clean napkins and all those kind of things, right? You want the food served in a reasonable amount of time, but you don't care if the waiter had to run from the kitchen to bring you the food, right? The speed at which the waiter went from the kitchen to your table is irrelevant in all this. And yet in transportation, that's what we've pursued. How fast can we get people to move instead of thinking of all these other considerations here? So we need to start reinventing roadways. A friend of mine, Jim Kunstler, invented the term generica. This is generica. This could be anywhere. I show slides all over the country, and I show this slide, and people say, oh yeah, I know that street, because we built it everywhere in the country, right? So what can we do to transform this street and make it more walkable and more bikeable? Well, it's very easy. It's called Photoshop, right? And this is this is Portland, Oregon. It's a highway. We still haven't built it. We've been using this slide for 15 years, trying to shame. This is actually owned and operated by the Oregon DOT. Nothing's been done about it. But thanks to Photoshop, we have been able to demonstrate what could be done with that roadway. You can see all the features that we've added. We've added a planted median, bike lanes, wider and continuous sidewalks. We've taken the utilities, put them underground, planted trees. We've consolidated some of the accesses like I talked about earlier. What's interesting is we did not widen the road. We did it all within the existing footprint. And I think that's one of the key messages I want to leave with you tonight. To improve walking and bicycle conditions, you don't need to be purchasing any right-of-way. You don't need to be widening the roads. You need to be reducing the footprint that the automobile takes on those roads and rededicating that space to higher and better use. There's ample right-of-way. Several times over the past few days I've heard, well, we're in a constrained environment, we're in a mountain environment, we can't widen the roads. I just came back from a cross Switzerland trip on my bicycle where I rode over some of the most famous passes, and we have passes in Switzerland that carry traffic, trucks, and the Swiss postal buses that are about the size of a typical American driveway. They're about 12 feet wide, the roads, okay? And they carry traffic, and people don't crash into each other, and they're absolutely wonderful experience. 12-foot wide two-way roads going up over the mountains, right? Those are the major passes, the St. Gothard passes, some of those mythical passes. That's what they're like. So, you know, constrained mountain conditions are actually something that should be helping you, because otherwise you're looking at Phoenix and Albuquerque and Florida where they have all the space in the world. The roads are incredibly wide and they're absolutely deadly. So when you transform a street to try to make it more vibrant, you do have to start with a street, bring in all these elements, because people are not going to invest in a bad street. You're not going to get the kind of development that you want that creates a city, that creates a village if you got a crappy street. So you do have to start the street. No developer is going to build people-oriented design on a car-oriented street. So you do have to make that first leap. And by the way, I do believe in baby steps. It's just when you're jumping over a canyon, you don't want to do it in 2 steps. That's the quote. So again, to finish up here, it is about destinations. So what have cities tried to do to make their places more attractive? I should add in convention centers, and I know you've got a stalled convention center, and I say congratulations, because that is exactly what you don't want. People are very worried, and I'll leave this slide up without putting the big X through it, right? This is a sure sign of failure, where this is what you're thinking, oh, this is what we do to make our city more attractive. Every place in the country is trying to do this, and it's simply not working. You need to build a place for you first. Where do you want to live? Where do you really want to raise your family? Where do you want to retire? Where do you want to play, right? It's all about bringing people. All these are from Vancouver, British Columbia, one of the most successful cities in North America. Think of the sidewalks, think of the streets as outdoor living rooms. Yeah, you got natural beauty around you, you got parks, you got the mountains, you got the lake, but you do spend most of your time in the built environment. Every time I go to Alaska, it always shocks me that most Alaskans spend most of the time in concrete and steel buildings in their cars. They're not out there hiking Denali. They're spending most of their time in shopping malls. Sidewalks, basically that's sidewalk sales. You can, so you did find your battery at the Radio Shack finally, right? Did the Radio Shack look like this, or was it surrounded by a sea of parking? It was like this. Okay, very good. Yeah, you can get the big national chains to do things your way. Don't think that you have to do it with a typical model. Good place to have sidewalk artists start their career. Peaceful places to meditate. These are all streets that I'm showing you. These are all public streets, okay? Places to sit and think and meditate and think about the new generation. I took this photo about 10 years ago, so this kid's 12-year-old now, going to middle school. Another 10 years, he will be a doctor or nurse taking care of me in my old age, right? The ultimate goal is you want streets filled with people and activity. And with that, I'd like to thank you.